My name is Jack Sloan, and I've been a truck driver for 20 years. This is life on wheels, the loneliness of roads, random stops at gas stations and roadside cafes. But one night was the beginning of the most terrible period of my life, which I will never forget. It all started as an ordinary flight. I had to deliver a shipment across several states, from Chicago to Seattle. The road was long, but familiar. I decided to shorten the route via the old highway Route 73. It was known among drivers as the one-time road because of its remoteness and lack of communication, but I was confident and decided that it would just be another day at work. After only a few hours of driving, when the sun had set, I felt that something was wrong. The overcast sky seemed unnaturally dark, and there was no signal on the radio. My GPS didn't work either. It seemed as if I was in the wilderness, far from civilization. Suddenly, I noticed a person standing on the side of the road, raising his hand in an attempt to stop the car. He looked ordinary, a middle-aged man with a backpack on his back. Something in his look made me stop. But as soon as I opened the door and he entered the cabin, I felt uneasy. His eyes had a cold, empty expression that I couldn't explain. "Thanks for picking me up," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "My name is Henry." I nodded and set off again. We were silent. But with each passing minute, I could feel the air around us growing heavier. It felt like I was groping my way more than once, but also trying to get around something invisible and dangerous. Henry suddenly turned to me. "Have you ever heard stories about missing drivers on this road?" Henry's question caught me by surprise. I didn't want to engage in small talk, especially on such topics, but his voice made me listen. He continued without even waiting for my answer. "It is said that drivers who take this road often disappear without a trace. Some cars are found abandoned, but the drivers themselves are not." I shrugged, trying not to sound worried. "Just rumors. The road is old, and not all drivers have experience on such tracks." Henry leaned forward a little, his eyes shining in the twilight. "Maybe so. But there is one story I heard from the locals. Once on this route, a driver named Tom was stopped. He was known as an experienced trucker. Once he went on a night flight and did not return. All they knew that he was driving on 73rd. After a few days, they found his truck, but there was no one. Only the cab was covered in blood, but there was no sign of Tom." A cold chill pierced me. The story sounded terrible, but I tried not to show my emotions. Maybe Tom just met the wrong people, or maybe it's just a legend to scare newcomers. Henry smiled, but his smile lacked warmth. Maybe. But you know what's interesting? Before he disappeared, he picked up a fellow traveler. No one knows who it was. My hands on the steering wheel got a little wet. I didn't want to believe the stories, but something in Henry's voice kept me on my toes. We drove on into the darkness, and I tried not to think about what might lie ahead. "So you drive this way a lot?" Henry suddenly asked, his voice hollow in the silence of the cabin. "Not often," I answered, trying to hide my nervousness. "And you?" "It's my first time," he replied, his smile once again appearing on his face, "but hopefully not the last." Something about his words made me shudder. He was looking ahead as if waiting for something, and I could feel the tension growing by the minute. I didn't know what exactly, but something terrible was approaching. We drove on, and the silence became heavy, like before a storm. Henry kept his eyes on the road, as if studying every turn, every sign. His presence was almost palpable, like a cold breath on the back. "You know," he said suddenly, never taking his eyes off the road, "I've always been interested in people's stories, especially those who live on wheels. Everyone has their own story, their own fear. Sometimes the greatest fears hide not in the depths of the night, but inside us." His words made me swallow nervously. I didn't want to get philosophical, but something in his words touched me. They sounded like he knew more than he was letting on, like he wasn't just a random fellow traveler. "You're right," I said, trying to keep my cool. "Everyone has their own fears. For example, I'm afraid when the road is too quiet. Like now." Henry looked at me, his eyes sparkling in the darkness. "Silence can be deceiving. It can hide the worst, but sometimes silence is your best friend." Again, I felt something cold running down my back. We continued to drive, and I noticed that I was getting low on gas. I was sure there would be gas stations soon, but the GPS still didn't work and there were no road signs. I felt I had to say something to diffuse the situation. "We need to find a gas station," I said, trying to sound calm. "Gas is running out." Henry nodded. "Yeah, that would be smart. But it doesn't look like we'll be seeing a gas station for a long time. This road is known for being deserted." It did not reassure me. I began to worry more than before. But at the same moment I saw a light ahead. It was not bright, but it stood out in the dark. I breathed a sigh of relief. "So we're not alone on this road," I said, expecting it to be a regular gas station or cafe. Henry leaned forward, staring intently at the light. "Maybe, or it's something that will try to drag us into even more darkness." His words sounded like a warning, and I felt my heart beat faster. What is this place? And what did he mean? We were getting closer to the light, and I realized it wasn't a gas station. It was an old, almost abandoned building, lit by a single lamp at the entrance. On the door hung a sign that was barely visible in the dim light. Bar and Grill. I stopped the truck and looked at Henry. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. "It's time to come in and find out what awaits us inside." I turned off the engine and we both got out of the truck. The night was deaf. Only soft music could be heard from the bar. The door creaked open and I smelled old wood and roasting meat. The bar looked old and run down, but there were a few patrons in it. They were all sitting in silence, lost in their thoughts or drinking their drinks, ignoring us. We went inside and I heard the door slam shut behind us. A sense of confinement hung over me. I glanced at Henry, but he looked calm, even interested. The bartender, a short man with gray hair, looked up at us. "What do you want?" he asked with a slight accent, wiping his glass. "Coffee and something to eat," I said, feeling the silence in the bar almost oppressive. Henry winked at the bartender. "And a couple more stories if you have any." The bartender smiled, but his smile was somehow strange. "Stories, you say? Well, there's always something to tell on this road." He poured coffee into 2 cups and placed them in front of us. "You know, this place wasn't always so deserted. It used to be full of people, but now—" He scanned the empty tables. "Now, we are the only ones left, the ghosts of the past." I tensed up at his words. All these hints about some secrets started to get on my nerves. I didn't want to get involved in this game, but something kept me here, like I was already a part of this story. Henry leaned back in his chair and took a cup of coffee. "Ghosts of the past, you say? And what happened to all the people?" The bartender sighed, his gaze becoming distant. "Many years ago, when this bar was still popular, a terrible thing happened here. A man came in as if he were a regular customer and ordered himself a drink. But then he started talking about finding something terrible on this road, something that shouldn't have existed. He said it hunted people and that he saw its true face." I felt a cold sweat run down my back. This story was getting more and more creepy. "Everyone thought he was just crazy," the bartender continued, "but a few days later he disappeared, like many others after him. They say that anyone who sees the same thing as him either disappears or never comes back, as I was before." Henry seemed very interested, but I couldn't take the strange story any longer. "And what exactly did he see?" I asked, feeling the tension build. The bartender looked straight at me, his eyes dark and serious. "No one knows for sure, but everyone who goes down this road has a chance to find out for themselves." The bartender's words hung in the air, creating an even more oppressive atmosphere. I felt my heart clench with inexplicable fear. Henry seemed to enjoy the conversation, but I wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. We drank coffee in silence. I pondered what to do next. My truck was about to run out of fuel, and this place didn't look like a good place to fill up, but going further wasn't the best option given everything I'd heard. Henry put his cup down and looked at me. "Well, Jack, what do you think? Shall we continue on our way, or stay here, waiting for the unknown?" His words sounded like a challenge. I hesitated. This decision felt like a choice between 2 terrifying paths: to stay in this bar full of spooky stories, or to continue the path into the night that hides its secrets. But staying here with Henry, with his strange behavior and fondness for scary stories, was too disturbing. "We need to move on," I said, trying to hide the uncertainty in my voice. "Maybe we'll find a gas station or just a safer place to stop." Henry nodded and smiled. but there was that cold glint in his eyes again. "As you say, Jack, but be careful. You never know what's in store for you on this road." We got up from the table and went to the exit. The bartender looked at us with a mixed expression on his face, a mixture of pity and warning. "Take care," he said when we opened the door. Stepping outside, I felt the cold night wind refresh my thoughts. I needed to be free of this strange place and this even stranger companion as soon as possible. But when we got to the truck, something changed. I noticed that one of my tires was flat. "What the hell?" I exclaimed, surveying the damage. It wasn't just a flat tire. It looked like someone had deliberately slashed the tire. Henry came closer and looked at the tire, remaining calm. "It seems we've run into some unforeseen trouble. What do you think it was? An accident, or is someone trying to stop us?" His words made me sick. I couldn't believe this was happening. All I wanted was to just do my job and get to my destination. But now we're stuck here in the middle of the night with a flat tire and no clear plan of action. I began to think about what to do next. We could have tried to call for help, but with the GPS and radio not working, that was unlikely. There was only one thing left: to stay in the bar for the night and wait for the morning. "Got back to the bar and spend the night there," I said with a bitter sense of defeat. "We'll try to sort it out in the morning." Henry didn't object, just nodded. "Okay, Jack, but be careful. This night is far from over." We made our way back to the bar, and I felt more and more tense with each step. The bartender looked up when we walked in and immediately knew something was wrong. I explained the tire situation to him, and he nodded in understanding. "It happens," he said calmly, as if it were something common on this road. "We have several rooms on the second floor. You can spend the night here." It wasn't the best option, but it was the only one we had. We climbed the stairs, and I could feel the old wood creaking under our feet. The bar was even older and grimmer than it appeared at first glance. We got our room keys, and I went into mine. The room was simple, with one bed and a small window that let in almost no light. I felt trapped, but it was probably better than being left on the street with a flat tire and scary stories in my head. I threw my backpack on the floor and sat on the bed. The room was quiet. Only the faint buzzing of the lamp disturbed this silence. I took off my shoes and decided to lay down on the bed, trying to rest. But my thoughts did not give me peace. What is this place? Why is everyone so weird here? And why is Henry so fond of these spooky stories? I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Every sound seemed suspicious. Every creak seemed threatening. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock on the door. I froze, not sure if it was my imagination or if someone was actually knocking. The knock was repeated, now a little louder. I got out of bed and crept to the door, trying not to make any noise. I slowly opened the door. Henry was standing in the doorway, his face serious but calm at the same time. "Jack," he whispered, leaning closer. "You should see it. Something strange is going on down there." My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't want to go, but something in his voice made me comply. We slowly made our way down the stairs, and I noticed that the lights in the bar were dimmed. Henry led me to a small room at the end of the corridor that I hadn't noticed before. He quietly opened the door, and we entered. The room was semi-dark, but I could see at once that it was a warehouse or a utility room. Various things were scattered throughout the room: old furniture, boxes, some incomprehensible objects. But the scariest thing was that on one of the racks I saw something that looked like people's personal belongings: wallets, watches, phones. "What is all this?" I asked, feeling my fingers grip the doorknob. Henry silently walked over to one of the shelves and picked up one of the phones. He turned it on, and I saw a picture of a man and a woman on the screen. Henry looked at me. His face was cold and serious. "These are things of missing people," he said. "Those who drove this road and never came back." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I was filled with horror. Who was this bartender? What's going on in this bar? And what did that mean for us? The room grew even quieter, and I could feel the pressure of the situation building. I could not believe that we were standing among the belongings of missing people. These weren't just scary stories. They were reality. My thoughts were racing, and I couldn't find a logical explanation for what I was seeing. Henry calmly looked at the shelves as if they were a museum and not evidence of something terrible. We have to get out of here, I whispered, trying not to break down in fear. This is no place for us. Henry slowly turned to me, his face still. And how do you plan to do that, with a flat tire and no communication? He went to one of the wallets and opened it. There's more to this than just coincidence, Jack. I felt panic rising inside. We were trapped. I quickly looked around the room, trying to find a way out or something that could help us, but there was nothing useful. We have to find a way to get out of here, I said, trying to stay focused. Maybe we can use one of the cars in the parking lot. Even if it's old, we can go. Henry nodded, but his face remained unmoved. Maybe, but first we need to understand what's going on here. He looked at me with an expression bordering on curiosity and coldness. Don't you want to know who's doing it? Who's to blame for all this? I was furious. Henry, this is not the time to investigate. We have to get out of here and contact the police. He looked at me, his gaze piercing me to the bone. What if I tell you that I've already applied, that the police know about this place but don't do anything? My heart sank again. It sounded incredible, but something in his words made me believe it. Maybe they were part of the conspiracy? Was something else involved? I took a step back, trying to find some support in the wall. What are you saying? That this is all planned? That we're just another victim? Henry took another step towards me, his voice almost a whisper. I don't know for sure, Jack, but I do know that we can't just run away. We have to find out what's going on and who's behind it all. If we don't find out the truth, we won't be safe anywhere. My body shuddered with fear. I didn't want to stay here another minute, but I realized that Henry was right. If we just run away, we'll always be looking over our shoulder, not knowing if this mystery will catch up with us. I sighed and nodded. Okay, but how do we find the answers? We don't have much time. Henry smiled, but his smile was cold. We need to talk to the bartender. He knows more than he's letting on, and we need to find other clues that might be here in this bar. I nodded, though my fear and distrust of Henry still remained. We had to act quickly and carefully. Time was against us, and every minute could be decisive. We decided to go back to the main hall of the bar, but we had to do it carefully. I didn't want to attract too much attention from the bartender or the other patrons, if they were at all in cahoots. We quietly left the utility room and headed down the corridor, carefully listening for every sound. Approaching the hall, I noticed that the atmosphere was no less depressing than before. The bartender stood behind the bar, wiping glasses as bartenders often do in movies. He looked up at us, and I felt his cold eyes on me. Are you all right? He asked with a hint of sarcasm in his voice, noticing that we were alarmed. I tried to remain calm and natural, although my thoughts were far from calm. We just wanted to see if you had the tools to repair the tires, I said, hoping it sounded plausible. The bartender smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. I don't think they will help you in this situation, but you can try the warehouse where we keep some things. His words made me wary. Did he know we were already in stock, or did he just sense something was wrong? I looked at Henry, and he just gave a slight nod, letting me know that we would continue the game. Thank you, I replied, trying to sound confident. Maybe we should take another look. We were about to leave when the bartender suddenly raised his hand. Wait a minute, he said, his voice softening a bit but still wary. You know there are certain rules on this road, right? I stopped in surprise. Rules? I asked, not understanding what he was talking about. The bartender leaned against the bar and looked at us with a slightly mocking expression. Those who travel this road must remember one rule. Never go beyond what you are allowed to see. Otherwise, you may find what you do not want to know. His words sounded like a threat. My heart beat faster, and I realized that the bartender knew more than he was letting on. He may even have been involved in all of this, but we couldn't just leave. It was necessary to understand what was happening and who was behind it. I decided to go all in. We just want to get out of here, I said, trying to sound determined. If you know what's going on this road, tell us. We don't want to be dragged into something that doesn't concern us. The bartender looked at me with a mixture of pity and cold curiosity. You're already hooked, friends. When you stopped at this bar, you crossed the line, and now you're part of a game that's always been here. My heart froze. Game? What other game? I was about to ask a few more questions, but I suddenly noticed how several other patrons sitting at the bar started looking at us. Their eyes were empty, emotionless. It looked like they were waiting for something that had to happen. Henry approached me and said quietly, "Jack, we better go back to the rooms. We don't know what's going on, but I think we'd better be careful." I nodded, feeling something change in the air. We slowly backed away and walked towards the stairs. The bartender continued to watch us. His smile appeared on his face again, but it was already cold and threatening. We went up to our rooms and closed the door. I sat up on the bed, feeling my nerves stretched to the limit. Henry sat down next to him. His face was serious. "We have to find out what's going on," he said quietly. "But it must be done carefully. This may be the last night when we can make a difference." I looked at him and felt my despair rising. We were trapped in a scary place where the rules were dictated by others, and we had no time to delay. As I sat in my room, I could feel the weight of the unknown and fear growing. Henry was right. We needed to act carefully but quickly. I tried to gather my thoughts and understand what to do next. Everything looked like a trap, but we could still try to find a way out. Henry walked over to the window and looked out at the empty parking lot behind the bar. I also approached and saw how the darkness of the night engulfed everything around. This place seemed isolated from the world, and we found ourselves here all alone. Henry turned to me, and I saw determination in his eyes. "I think we have to find a way to get out of here now while we can," he said. "Maybe we can find some keys to the other machines or try to find some help." I sighed, trying to hold back my panic. What if this place is really enchanted? What if all these people disappeared here because they were trying to escape? Henry put his hand on my shoulder. "I don't know, Jack, but we can't just sit around and wait for something to happen to us. We have to act." His words were logical, but it did not remove my fear. I nodded and started gathering things that I could take with me. Henry also got ready, and we decided to try to find a way out. We left the room and began to quietly go down the stairs. The bar was almost empty except for a few patrons who looked like locals sitting at their tables. The bartender was still at the bar, but thankfully he wasn't paying any attention to us. We went out into the parking lot and approached several cars. I tried to open the doors, but they were all locked. Henry found a crowbar in the trunk of one of the cars, which was a little strange. We decided to use it to try to open one of the machines. Suddenly, I heard a sound coming from the side of the bar. I turned around and saw several people exiting the building. They were walking towards us, their movements slow but sure. I felt my heart beat faster. "Henry, someone's coming," I whispered, trying not to panic. Henry turned and saw them too. He stood up and took the crowbar in his hands, ready to defend himself if necessary. I retreated back, trying to find some weapon or defense. People were coming closer, and now I could make out their faces. They were emotionless, with cold, empty eyes. It looked like they were programmed to do something. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What you want?" Henry shouted, trying to buy time. One of the men stopped and looked at us. He was older, with gray hair and wrinkles on his face. His voice was soft but clear. "You broke the rules. Now you have to answer for it." I felt my fear turn into panic. We were trapped, surrounded by people who looked like zombies. I didn't know what to do, but I knew we had to get out of here. Henry gripped the crowbar and stepped forward. "We don't want any trouble," he said, trying to sound calm. "We just want to go." The old man smiled, but it was a cold, joyless smile. "No one leaves until the game is over, and the game has just begun." I felt the cold run over my skin. It was more than just fear. It was a terror of the unknown, of what might happen. I looked at Henry again and he nodded, making it clear that we had to fight for our lives. And then, something strange happened. People started moving towards us faster. Their movements became more aggressive. Henry swung his crowbar, ready to defend himself, but I could see that there were too many of them. We could not resist them all. I gathered all my strength and ran back to the bar, trying to find some other way out or to defend myself. Henry ran after me, and I heard him yell, "We can't give up! We must fight!" We jumped inside and closed the door, trying to find something to protect us. The bartender was standing behind the bar, looking at us with a slightly mocking expression. "The game has begun," he said, raising his glass as if to welcome us. "Now you have to find your way." My heart was beating like crazy, and I didn't know what to do next. But one thing was clear: we were trapped, and our lives depended on whether we could get out alive. The bartender remained calm, as if watching a show that he himself had organized. I felt the adrenaline rush through my body, making me think faster. Around us were several chairs, bottles, and objects that could become weapons, or at least some kind of protection. I snatched a heavy glass bottle from the rack, and Henry picked up a wooden chair. "They won't stop," Henry said, breathing hard. "We have to find a way out." I nodded, looking back at the bartender. "What game is this?" I shouted to him, feeling that time was pressing on us. The bartender smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "This is a test of survival. Those who come out victorious stay alive. Those who lose—" He shrugged as if it was insignificant. "Just disappear." My heart sank. It was crazy. But it was clear that this man was convinced of his words, and now, looking at us, he enjoyed our fear. "How do we get out of here?" Henry said, feeling like we were running out of options. The bartender leaned forward, a sinister expression on his face. "The only way is to pass all the trials. Each of you must decide how far you are willing to go, but remember that your actions have consequences." I felt my hands shaking. It was like a horror movie, but everything was real. I couldn't stop my breathing from accelerating rapidly. We had to find a way out of this situation, and quickly. Henry threw the chair to the floor, breaking it in two, and took one of the legs as a makeshift weapon. "We have to move," he said, his voice laced with determination. "We need to find the next clue or exit." I gathered my will into a fist and nodded. We began to move cautiously through the bar, ready for any surprises. The door to the utility room, where we found the belongings of the missing people, appeared before us again. I realized that this might be our only hope of finding something useful. We carefully opened the door and went inside. Again, I saw the same shelves with personal belongings. I was overcome by a strange mixture of fear and pity for those who disappeared here before us. We began to carefully examine all the items, looking for any clues or clues. Suddenly, I noticed that an old notebook was lying on one of the shelves. It looked very used, and I felt it might be important. I opened it, and Henry and I started flipping through the pages. These were recordings made by different people. They described their attempts to escape, their fears, and what they learned about the place. "There's a way out here," Henry said, pointing to one of the notes. "But it's hidden and protected. People talk about underground tunnels and traps." I felt my hope begin to melt away. It was even more difficult than we thought. But that was the only clue we had. We had to find these tunnels and try to break free. "Whatever happens, we have to be ready," I said, closing the notebook and putting it in my pocket. "This is our only chance." We decided to go back to the bar and try to find the entrance to the underground tunnels. But as soon as we left the utility room, we heard a loud noise. The door to the bar was closed, and we knew something was wrong. The bartender and the people who were in the bar disappeared. But the main thing is that the door was locked from the inside. My heart pounded. We were trapped, and I didn't know how we were going to get out of here. But one thing was clear. We must act quickly and carefully, otherwise we could become the next to disappear in this eerie place. We found ourselves in a locked room, and despair came over me. The bartender and everyone else disappeared, leaving us alone. Henry looked at me with a mixture of determination and fear. I felt like we had reached the end. But would it be a happy ending for us? "We have to find the underground tunnels," Henry said, trying to stay calm. "This is our only chance." I remembered the notebook we had found. It could hold the key to our salvation. We quickly returned to the utility room and started looking at it again. On one of the pages was a map with markings. I looked closely and saw that one of the signs pointed to the back of the bar. "This could be the entrance to the tunnels," I said, showing Henry the map. "We have to check." We returned to the main hall and began to search the back. In the darkness, we found a small door, almost imperceptible. They were locked, but a crowbar Henry got hold of helped us open them. Under the door, we found a staircase leading down into the darkness. I felt my heart start to beat faster. We entered the tunnel, carefully descending the stairs. The stairs led us into a narrow corridor where the smell of dampness and rot was almost unbearable. The corridor was long and dark, lit only by the faint light that filtered in from the ventilation shafts. We walked forward, trying not to think about what might be waiting for us. Finally, we reached a large room filled with various mechanisms and pipes. In the center of the room was a large lever system. I remembered the bartender's words about trials and that our actions have consequences. I didn't know what this mechanism did, but it was the only option we had. Henry walked over to the lever and looked at me. "Finished?" he asked, and I felt his determination rub off on me. I nodded. "Let's do it." Henry pulled the lever. At first, nothing happened, but then we heard a loud noise like the roar of engines. The floor beneath us shook, and we heard something moving behind the walls. Suddenly, one of the wall panels began to move away, opening an exit for us. Daylight broke into the tunnel, illuminating us. We ran to the hole and got out. We ended up on an empty road, far from the bar. I looked back to see the tunnel walls closing in again, leaving darkness behind. We were free. I could not believe what happened. We breathed deeply, feeling the tension subside. It was like a miracle, but we got out of the trap. We found a car abandoned on the side of the road and got into it, trying to figure out what to do next. Henry started the engine and we were off. We decided to go straight to the nearest town and tell about everything that happened. We knew no one would believe us, but it was the only right decision. On the way, we discussed what could be behind all this. Were other people involved? Was it a conspiracy? We never found out what exactly happened and who was behind these tests. But one thing was clear. We survived. After a few hours, we reached the city and stopped at the police station. We knew we had to tell our story, even if it sounded unbelievable. We got out of the car and went to the building, ready to do anything to uncover the truth about what happened. It was the end of our adventure, but it was also the beginning of a new life where we learned to appreciate every moment and every breath. We had been through a real test, and now we knew that real fear could be much worse than any fiction.